The smoke coming from the line shack was wrong. Not gone. Not strong. Just one thin gray thread, leaning sideways in the wind, the kind of smoke that says a fire is trying to live in losing. Caleb Rusk saw it from the North Ridge just after sundown. He was riding home with Split Pine on the pack horse, his gloves stiff with ice, his beard rimmed white from the cold. He knew every working chimney in that country. He knew the difference between a family fire, a cook fire, a dying fire, and a fire that had been built by somebody too exhausted to keep it alive. This was the last kind. Then he heard the baby, not a full cry, a cracked little sound that carried through frozen timber and vanished. Caleb stopped his horse. The shack below him had not held a legal tenant in 8 years. It belonged to the old survey road, to rotted canvas, broken roof beams, and the kind of men who disappeared before spring. But there was smoke, and there was a baby. So he turned down the ridge. 2 nights earlier, Leora Hale had been standing on the porch of her father's house with no coat and a child under her shawl. The thermometer by the pump read 9 degrees. She remembered that because numbers were easier to hold than terror. 9 degrees, 39 days since her daughter was born. 7 miles to the line shack her father had called shelter, and 1 sentence from Abram Hale still moving around inside her like a blade. That child is not a daughter of this house. She is the proof of your shame. Leora had not answered him at first. She had stared past her father at the dining room where her mother sat with both hands folded in her lap, and where her younger brother Emmett looked at the floor as if the boards had suddenly become very important. Her baby Ivy made a warm sleeping weight against her chest. The room smelled of lamp oil, roast onions, and the heavy silence of people deciding not to be brave. "You can punish me," Leora said at last, "but you will not speak of her like she is a stain." Abram Hale did not raise his voice. He rarely did. Men like him learned early that land, cattle, money, and fear could do the shouting for them. "I am done carrying the price of your foolishness," he said. "You leave tonight." Her mother flinched. Not enough to stand. Just enough to show that she had heard the sentence land. That small flinch hurt Lyra more than the cold. By morning, Emmett had hitched the old dun mare to a wagon and loaded what the family could spare, without appearing kind. A sack of cornmeal, 2 blankets, a tin of beans, 3 pieces of salt pork wrapped in paper, a cracked lantern, a box of matches, her sewing kit, Ivy's swaddling cloths, not her winter coat, that stayed on the peg by the Hale kitchen door, exactly where Leora had reached for it before Abram said, "No, you will not leave this house dressed in my charity." Emmett heard it. He said nothing. But when Leora climbed onto the wagon bench with Ivy tucked inside her shawl, he slipped his own wool scarf beside her hand. He did not look at her when he did it. Maybe he was ashamed, maybe he was only cold. Either way, she took it. The road to Broken Ridge took nearly 4 hours because the snow had thawed and frozen into a crust sharp enough to cut the mare's pasterns. Leora stopped twice to clear the ice from the animal's hooves. Once she stopped because Ivy woke hungry and angry, and Leora had to sit beside the wagon wheel in the blowing cold, feeding her child while the wind cut through her dress and lifted needles of snow from the ditch. By the time she reached the line shack, the sky had gone blue-black. The place leaned toward the slope as if it had been trying to lie down for years. One corner of the roof was patched with old wagon canvas. The door hung crooked. The window was stuffed with oilcloth gone yellow and stiff. Inside, the floor smelled of mouse nests, damp ash, and abandoned men. Leora stood in the doorway and almost laughed, not because anything was funny, because the mind sometimes reaches for the wrong sound when the right one would break it. Ivy made a small breathy noise against her. Leora pressed her lips to the baby's cap. "All right," she whispered. "Then this is what we have." The first week stripped her of every softness she had left. She learned which cracks in the wall mattered most. She learned that pine bark smoked more than it burned. She learned how to sleep in pieces, 10 minutes at a time, between nursing, shivering, mending, and waking in panic because the fire had sunk too low. The mare needed feed, The baby needed milk. The roof needed repair. Lyra needed more than any one person could provide, but needing had become dangerous. Needing was how people gained power over you. Needing was how fathers made rules and towns made judgments and charming men left before dawn with your future inside you. So she did not need. She managed. She tore strips from her underskirt to stuff the wall gaps. She melted snow for wash water. She rationed cornmeal by pinches and told herself hunger was only information. She hauled deadfall from the lower slope until her hands cracked open. And every night, when Ivy slept against her chest, Leora felt the child's breath as the only honest thing in the world. The town did not let her forget what she had become to them. On the 6th day, she drove to Briar Pass for lamp oil and a little oats for the mare. She held Ivy close and walked into Harlan Pike's store. Conversation died before the bell over the door stopped ringing. Mrs. Pike looked at the baby, then at Leora's bare ring finger, though she had seen both before and needed neither confirmed. "Miss Hale?" she said, with the kind of politeness that locks the door while smiling. Leora bought the oil, she bought the oats. A woman from church crossed to the other side of the street when Leora stepped outside. To side, an old ranch hand who had once tipped his hat to her since she was a girl looked through her like winter glass. Nothing dramatic happened. No one shouted. No one threw stones. That was what made it so cleanly cruel. They simply removed her from the category of people. She drove back to the line shack, put Ivy on the blanket near the fire, sat down on the floor, and cried for 11 minutes. Then she wiped her face, measured cornmeal into a pan, and kept living. By the 3rd week, Ivy's fever came. It started as warmth under the baby's cap. Too much warmth, wrong warmth. By dusk, Ivy would not settle. Her little body jerked with exhausted cries, and her eyes looked too bright in the firelight. Lyra used the only thermometer she had brought from the Hale house, 102, then 103. By morning, the firewood was nearly gone. Leora stood behind the shack with one arm around her crying baby and looked at the empty place where a woodpile should have been. The math was simple and impossible. Briar Pass was too far. The doctor was farther. The mare was weak. Ivy could not survive hours in open cold, and the ridge above the shack had dead cedar on it. So Lyra wrapped Ivy in every blanket she could spare, set her in a nest near the embers, and went up the slope with a hatchet and a wrist already aching from cold. The crust broke beneath her on the 10th step. She went down hard. Her shoulder struck stone. Her right hand twisted under her. For a moment, she saw nothing but white sky and black branches. Then the pain arrived, sharp, clean, uninterested in her opinion. Leora rolled onto her side, dragged air into her lungs, and said to the sky, "No, you do not get her." She crawled the rest of the way to the cedar. She cut what she could. She slid down the ridge sitting because standing was no longer an option. When she reached the shack, Ivy was still crying, but the sound had thinned. That frightened Leora more than screaming. She fed the fire with shaking hands. Smoke filled the room before the chimney caught. Leora wrapped her swollen wrist in a torn sleeve, sat on the floor with Ivy in her lap, and understood a truth she had been refusing. She could be strong. She could be stubborn. She could be right, and still not be enough alone. That was when Caleb Rusk knocked. Leora froze. The knock came again. Not timid, not threatening, just certain. "Who is it?" she called. A man's voice answered through the door. "Name's Caleb Rusk. I run cattle north of here. Your chimney's smoking thin." Heard a baby from the ridge. Lyra looked at the door latch, then at Ivy, then at the hatchet beside the hearth. "Go away," she said. "I can," he answered. "But I've got dry pine on a pack horse, and that fire won't make midnight." That was the first thing about Caleb Rusk that unsettled her. He did not argue with her fear. He only told the truth and left her room to choose. She opened the door with the hatchet in her left hand. Caleb stood on the threshold in a sheepskin coat darkened by snow. He was broad through the shoulders, 35 maybe, with weather cut into the corners of his eyes and no surprise on his face when he saw the baby. The ruined wrist, the bad roof, the one blanket too few. He looked, he understood. He did not pity. "May I bring the wood in?" he asked. Leora stepped aside. He worked without fuss. He stacked pine by the wall, rebuilt the fire properly, opened the flue with a bent iron rod, and made the room warm enough that Ivy's crying changed from panic to complaint. From his saddlebag he brought willow bark, clean cloth, a bottle of spirits, and a small packet of dried mint. "My mother used willow for fever," he said. "It is not a doctor, but it is not nothing." Leora watched him measure water into the blackened kettle. "Why do you carry all that?" His hands paused for half a second. "My wife died of fever 3 winters ago." There was no performance in the sentence. No bid for sympathy, just the reason. Leora had no answer ready, so she gave him the only honest one. "I'm sorry." Caleb nodded once. Then he wrapped her wrist. He held Ivy while Leora drank water. He patched the roof with canvas from his own pack. He stayed until the baby's fever began to ease, until the fire had coals that would hold, until the lined shack felt less like a place waiting to bury them. At the door, he put his gloves back on. "I ride this boundary twice a week," he said. "If the smoke looks wrong, I'll stop. You don't need to." "No." He looked at Ivy asleep in Leora's arms. "She's still here because of you," he said quietly. "Remember that when the dark gets loud." Then he left. For the first time in weeks, Leora slept more than an hour. Caleb came back on Thursday with more wood. 6 eggs wrapped in straw, a paper of coffee, and a piece of smoked venison. Lyra opened the crate and closed it again. "I cannot pay you." "I did not bring a bill. That does not make it easier." "No," he said. "Hunger makes things harder. Food makes them less hard." She hated how plain that was. She hated more that he was right, so she accepted the food. He repaired the north roof beam while she cooked venison with cornmeal. When he came inside, she put a plate in front of him without asking. They ate at the little table with Ivy asleep in a drawer beside the hearth. "Your place north of here," Lyra said. "What is it called?" "Red Lantern Ranch." "That sounds grand." "It is not." "How many head?" 60. 2 that survived winter. 70 if the spring calves come right. Do you run it alone?" "Mostly." "That's foolish." Caleb looked at her. She looked back. Then, for the first time since Abram Hale shut the door behind her, Lyra almost smiled. "I kept the accounts for my father's outfit from the time I was 15, she said. No man, running 70 head alone in this country is doing it wisely." His mouth moved like it wanted to become a smile and thought better of it. "Then maybe you should look at my books before you insult me again." "I did not insult you, I assessed you. That is worse." It became a rhythm, Tuesday, Thursday. Smoke, wood, coffee, repairs. Caleb never arrived empty-handed, but he also never arrived like a rescuer expecting gratitude to be paid in softness. He asked before he crossed the room. He waited before he touched the baby. He treated Lyra's no like a complete sentence. That, more than the food, disarmed her. By April, Ivy had begun turning toward his voice. Caleb noticed the first time and went very still, as if a bird had landed on him. "She knows you," Lyra said. "She knows noise. She knows your noise." He looked at the child. Poor judgment for one so young. Leora laughed before she could stop herself. The sound surprised them both. In May, Caleb asked her to come see Red Lantern, not live there, not stay, just see it. She almost refused because refusal was safer. But Ivy was stronger now. The snow had pulled back, and some part of Leora wanted to know what kind of place produced a man who could be that steady without making a sermon of it. Red Lantern was rougher than its name. The house was square and plain. The barn was better built than the kitchen. The yard was mud, manure, and trampled hay. But beyond the east fence, the whole valley opened like a held breath. Blue distance, white peaks, grass just beginning to come back after winter. Leora stopped walking. Caleb stood beside her. "On a clear day," he said, "you can see all the way to Crow Mesa. Do you ever stop noticing? No. Inside, she looked at his account books. Within an hour, she had found the leak in his winter feed costs, the reason his supply orders failed before thaw, and a way to buy salt in bulk through a freighter who owed her father money. Caleb stared at the page. What? She asked. I thought you were good at accounts. I am? No, he said. You're dangerous. Something warm moved through her, but she kept her face still. I prefer useful. Useful can be dangerous. That summer, Lyra began working at Red Lantern 3 days a week. At first, it was practical. The line shack was poor shelter, the mare was old. Caleb needed books kept. Leora needed work that belonged to her hands again. Then the practical reasons grew roots under them. A cup of coffee waiting on the table because Caleb knew she would arrive cold. A latch fixed on the back room before she ever mentioned it was loose. A space cleared for Ivy's cradle beside the window with the softest morning light. Small things. But small things were how a life built itself when nobody was trying to impress an audience. Briar Pass noticed. Of course it did. By June, the gossip found her through Mrs. Ansell, the widow who ran the Crossroads store and had outlived enough scandal to stop respecting it. They are saying you and Rusk have an arrangement, Mrs. Ansell said while tying Flower closed. Leora held Ivy tighter. What kind? The kind lonely people invent so they can feel clean by comparison. Lyra said nothing. Mrs. Ansell pushed the sack across the counter. I told Abram Hale that the only arrangement I can see is a man bringing wood to a woman everyone else left freezing. Lyra looked up. My father was here, yesterday, asking questions in a tone that made me remember why I never married a rich rancher. A week later, Abram rode to Red Lantern. Caleb told her about it that evening at the line shack, sitting at her table with his hat in both hands. He said I was taking advantage. Leora felt the blood leave her face. Caleb continued carefully. He said you were a problem no decent man would pay full price for. The room went still. I'm sorry, Leora whispered. Don't put your mouth around his words for him. She looked at him. The line landed harder than she expected. Caleb met her eyes. What he said belongs to him? For a long moment, neither of them moved. Then Leora asked the question she had been carrying for months. Why do you keep coming back? He took his time, because that was Caleb. Slow, precise, unwilling to lie for comfort. Because when I leave you here, he said, the road home feels emptier than it used to. Her throat tightened. That frightens me, I know. I'm not ready to trust wanting. I know that too. He put his hat on the table. I'm not asking you to be ready. I'm telling you the truth because you asked for it. In July, Leora moved to Red Lantern. They made rules, a separate room, a door that latched. Her work written down and paid from the ranch account. No assumptions, no pressure. Caleb agreed to all of it as if structure were not a wall between them, but the frame that made trust possible. The line shack did not vanish from her life. It remained 9 miles south, leaning under the weather, holding the memory of who she had been when she arrived there with nothing but a baby and refusal. But Red Lantern became the place where Ivy learned to sit upright, where Leora balanced ledgers at a table that no longer felt borrowed, where Caleb spoke to Ivy as if babies required explanations. She cannot understand a word, Leora told him once, as he described fence staples to the child. Not yet, he said. Not yet. The future tense of it stayed with her for days. In August, Abram Hale came again. This time he did not ride to accuse Caleb. He rode because Leora's mother, Elspeth, was ill. Her heart, Abram said, sitting stiffly on the bench outside Red Lantern, looking older than Leora had allowed him to be. She has asked for you. Lyra looked toward the valley. Did she ask for Ivy? Abram's jaw worked. Yes. And what do you want? The question seemed to catch him unprepared. Abram Hale had spent his life speaking for households, crews, contracts, and cattle. He was not used to being separated from the authority he carried. He stopped. I want to know what I am looking at when I look at you now. It was not an apology, but it was the first honest uncertainty she had ever heard from him. She went to Briar Pass 3 days later. Her mother lay in the back bedroom, smaller than memory, but with eyes still sharp enough to cut. When Leora entered with Ivy, Elspeth lifted one thin hand. "Bring her here." Leora sat beside the bed. Elspeth looked at Ivy for a long time. "She has your mouth," she said, "and your father's stubborn eyes, which seems unfair to everyone." Leora almost smiled. Then her mother closed her fingers around Leora's hand. "I knew you were lonely," Elspeth said. Leora went still. "I knew before that traveling man. I knew before the baby you were fading in that house, and I chose peace with your father over truth with my daughter." Her breath caught. "I am sorry." The words did not heal everything. They did not erase a winter, but they changed the air in the room. Leora looked at the woman who had failed her and loved her and feared too much, and was now trying, late, to tell the truth. "I'm better than I was," Leora said. "Because of him?" "Because of me," Leora said first. Then she added, "and because he made room for that." Elspeth nodded. "Then do not trade that room for a name." Abram made his offer that evening. He sat across from Leora in the front room, like a man negotiating land. She could return to Briar Pass. She could live in a house under the hail protection. Ivy could be introduced as his granddaughter, accepted, folded into the family name. There would be money, there would be respectability, there would be conditions. "And Caleb?" Leora asked. Abram looked at the fire. That connection would need to end. "No," he looked at her. She did not raise her voice. "No," she said again, "not for money, not for the Hale name, not for a town that learned my child's worth from a rumor." Abram's face hardened by habit, then loosened by effort. "You have changed. Winter changes people." He was quiet for a long time. Then he asked, "How many head does Rusk run?" Lyra blinked. "What? His cattle, his land, his need for capital." That was how Abram Hale began trying to apologize. By asking for ledgers. It was clumsy. It was insufficient. It was also something September brought trouble wearing dust. The Drayton riders had been pushing through the high country for months, taking cattle from isolated outfits, choosing men too far from help. Red Lantern was exactly their kind of target. Caleb found the tracks along the north pasture, 7 horses, iron shod, moving without hiding. He sent a rider to Abram. "You think he'll come?" Caleb asked. Leora looked at the mountains. He will, if he understands what he owes. Abram came at midnight, 2 hours faster than any reasonable ride from Briar Pass. He brought Emmett and 2 Hale hands. No speeches, no conditions. Just horses blown hard, rifles checked, men taking positions in the cold dark. The Drayton riders came before dawn. The fight was not heroic. It was confusion. Shouting, cattle breaking against the box canyon, muzzle flashes in the dark. The metallic fear of men discovering the people they came to rob were not helpless. Leora was at the east wall with her father's old rifle and Ivy locked in the back room with a blanket and a wooden spoon. She fired once at a rider cutting toward the barn. She heard Caleb shout, then a horse screamed, then Abram's voice, sharp and clear. "Down, stay down." By gray morning, 3 Drayton men were tied at the fence. The rest were gone, and Caleb sat on the ground with blood darkening his sleeve. The bullet had gone through his upper arm, not fatal. Bad enough. Lyra reached him before she remembered moving. "I'm fine," he said. "You're sitting in the dirt, bleeding through your coat. I was standing earlier." Abram dropped beside them with strips torn from his own shirt. Lyra looked at her father. The man who had sent her to a broken shack now knelt in mud, pressing cloth to Caleb Rusk's wound with both hands and fear plain on his face. Not fear for reputation, not fear for appearances. Fear of losing the man his daughter loved. Though none of them had said the word yet. Caleb tried to look past her. Ivy, safe, the herd, still ours, the west gate. Caleb, he stopped. Leora leaned close. "Let someone take care of you for 1 minute." His eyes met hers. For once, he did not argue. "All right," he whispered. Abram stayed 3 days. He fixed the porch, fed horses, cooked badly, held Ivy in the evening with the solemn discomfort of a man discovering that a baby could forgive what adults could not. On the second night, Leora found him outside with Ivy asleep against his vest. Her tiny hand was wrapped around his finger. Abram did not know Leora was watching. His face in the porch light was stripped of authority. He looked only human. That hurt in a different way. It also helped. After her mother's funeral in October, Abram came to Leora on the Hale porch under a sky crowded with stars. "Your mother said I mistook provision for care," he said. Leora waited. "I thought feeding people meant loving them well enough, housing them, protecting the name, keeping the land whole." His voice roughened. "I did not understand that a house can be full and still starve a person." The night held them. "I put you out," he said, "with a child in winter. Yes, I am asking forgiveness because it is owed, not because I have earned it." Leora looked at the man who had broken something in her and the man who had ridden through the night to defend what she built after. Both were true. That was the terrible work of seeing people clearly. "I'm not there yet," she said. Abram nodded. "I know. But I am not closing the door." For a moment he looked like a man who had expected less and did not know how to hold more. "That is more than I deserve." "Yes," she said, and somehow it was not cruel. By November, Abram's apology had taken the shape he understood best: paper, terms, signatures, and capital. He invested in Red Lantern for a minority stake, funding feed storage, a bunkhouse, and enough hands to carry the herd to 140 head by summer. Caleb retained authority. Leora ran the books. Abram did not pretend it was charity. Caleb did not pretend he did not need it. The agreement was fair because Leora made sure it was fair, and because both men had learned enough to respect what she saw. At the end of the signing, Abram looked across the table. "I spoke badly of you without knowing you," he told Caleb. "You did. I was wrong." Caleb held his gaze. "All right, that was all. No embrace. No grand reconciliation, just two stubborn men deciding that truth was more useful than pride." In December, Caleb asked Leora to marry him at the east fence, where the valley opened all the way to Crow Mesa. He had forgotten his lunch again, and she had ridden out with Ivy bundled against her. The sky was hard blue, the grass was silver with frost. Caleb took the bread from her hand, then did not eat it. "I want you and Ivy to stay," he said. "Not as guests, not as an arrangement, as family. The legal kind if you want it." Lyra looked out across the country she had once thought of only as distance. The line shack was somewhere behind her. Briar Pass was behind that, her father's porch. The 9-degree night, the thin smoke, the baby fever. The knock on the door. Every step had been impossible until she took it. Ivy reached for Caleb. He took her automatically, with the careful hands of a man who understood exactly what he was being trusted with. Leora watched them. She was still afraid. Of course she was. Fear did not vanish, because love arrived. Sometimes fear simply learned to stand beside the thing that mattered and stop pretending it was wisdom. "Yes," she said. Caleb looked at her. "Yes?" "Yes. I want the legal kind." His face changed, not dramatically. Caleb did not do dramatic, but something in him set down a burden he had been carrying for a long time. "Good," he said. It was not poetry, it was better. They married in spring. 10 people came. Mrs. Ansell brought peaches. Emmett brought a carved wooden horse for Ivy, and could not look at it without blushing. Abram stood at the edge of the small gathering in his best coat, silent, watchful, trying in the only way he knew how not to make the day about Ivy, now walking with the fierce instability of a child who believes falling is a temporary insult, spent the ceremony collecting grass and handing it to people as if distributing wages. When the justice finished the words, Ivy marched straight to Caleb, grabbed his trouser leg, and said, "Up." Everyone laughed. Even Abram. Though his laugh was barely more than a breath, Caleb lifted her. Ivy settled against his shoulder like the matter had been legally resolved in her favor. Leora looked at them and understood something she had not understood when she stood on that porch in February. Home was not the house that claimed you when you were convenient. It was not a name handed down like a brand. It was not the approval of people who vanished when survival became ugly. Home was made, board by board, fire by fire, cup of coffee by cup of coffee, by the people who stayed long enough to learn where the roof leaked, where the accounts failed, where the heart had been damaged, and who did not turn away when the repair took longer than expected. That August Lyra sat on the repaired porch at Red Lantern, while the valley darkened and the last light caught the barn roof. The ranch had 140 head on pasture. The bunkhouse smelled of new timber. The ledgers balanced. Ivy slept inside with both arms thrown above her head, absolutely certain of her place in the world. Caleb came out with 2 cups of coffee and handed Leora the better one without thinking. That was how she knew. Not because of the wedding, not because of the signatures, not because the town eventually softened and pretended it had not once looked through her like glass. She knew because the better cup had become automatic, because Caleb's boots were by the door, because Ivy's breathing came through the open window, because somewhere south the broken line shack still stood, and Leora no longer needed to hate it. It had not destroyed her. It had shown her what could not be taken. She thought of the woman she had been in the cold, holding a 39-day-old baby under a shawl with no coat and no future she could see. That woman had not known this porch was waiting. She had not known the thin smoke would bring a stranger down from the ridge. She had only known that stopping was not allowed. So she kept going. And this was what waited on the other side of one more step. The hardest thing Leora Hale ever did was leave her father's house with nothing. The truest thing she ever did was build a home no one could take back. She took the coffee. She listened to her daughter breathing. She leaned her shoulder against Caleb's. And for the first time in her life, belonging did not feel granted. It felt earned, chosen, built. It felt like smoke rising strong from a roof that held. It felt like home.